I am not in my usual recording studio. Just kidding. Usually I record in my prayer closet. Today I'm not there because once the kids went to bed, I was just sitting around here in the living room, just thinking about something that I'd been reading over and over again this week. And then I thought, wow, I should just record what's in my heart right now, because sometimes when we wait, something else happens and then we get carried away and then it doesn't happen. So I've been reading Luke 15, and we all know the story of the prodigal son. That what's interesting is that in the past, when I've read this story, I have always focused on the compassion of the father, which is awesome. The story reveals so beautifully the heart of our Father, right? And he is so loving and so compassionate that if we were to go back to him, after being away from him for a long time or whatever, that he will gladly, we can trust that he will gladly receive us. And so that is, of course, a big takeaway from the story, right? But the other thing that I want to talk about tonight is the identity crisis that we read about in the story. We see that the younger son, he didn't really know who he was, who he belonged to, what he already had, just by being his father's son, because he thought he needed something more than what he already had. And you see that he was confused. There was this identity crisis, which led him to leave, take money with him, and he grabbed his stuff and he left, right? But quickly he realized, okay, in fact, the word says in, Luke 15, verse 17, it says, but when he came to his senses, what happened? He realized that he had to go back to his father. He wanted to go back. He knew there was nothing else left for him to do, or, he was lost. That's it. He had nothing to eat. And when he came to his senses at that point, immediately he knew, I have to go back to my father. And that's what happens to a lot of people. When we come to our senses, we realize, wow, I need father, And so that happened. But when he saw his father for the first time in a long time, what happened? In verse 18, he says, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Once again, it shows that he really didn't know his identity, which is what led, to all these issues, right, that he faced. Now, what does the father do as a result? Well, the father, first he gives him a hug, he kisses him, welcomes him, right? He lets him know it's okay for him to stay. He's not kicking him out. And then when he heard his son telling him that he's not even worthy to be called his son, the father immediately asks for the best robe that he had to be brought out and to be put on his son. And he also put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. It shows that he very quickly wanted to fix his identity problem. The first thing he does is, it's just so striking to me and so beautiful and powerful, that I can't even put it properly into words, and because this is so key, that he fixed his identity problem first, right? And then we see that he asked for a meal to be prepared, and he just wanted to eat and celebrate with him. But see, before the celebration, he fixed the identity problem. And so that is amazing. That's what the Lord wants to do for those of us who still are struggling with our identity. And I want to say this, I'm not just talking about, see, when we talk about identity, that's like a broad topic, and people may ask, well, are you talking about gender? Are you talking about, what are you talking about? Are you talking about feeling anxious, fear, what? All of the above. Everything falls under this, the umbrella of identity. And so the thing is, this is why it's so important that if we are struggling in any of these areas, if we can't trust God, if we are still doubtful whether, there's healing for us, if we're still doubtful whether we're saved, or if we were to commit a major sin right now, if you're doubtful whether God is loving and whether he would forgive you, any of these things, all of this, this applies to all of that, okay? A lot of people deal with this. And so this story is still as relevant as it was, when this was written. So anyway, so then we see part 2 of this. We see how the older son, who had just come back from work, from the field, and he saw all the music and the dancing and the partying is going on, and what happens? The first thing, when he realized that it was the younger son who had come back, and now the father has welcomed him back in and is celebrating his return, the first thing that happens in him is anger. He rejected this whole thing. It just didn't sit well with him. He couldn't accept it. And you can see his struggle there in the first couple of verses, from verse 25. And he says to his father, I've been working for you for so many years. This guy left home and has just returned. And you're celebrating, like, what about all the years that I served you? I've never neglected a command of yours, and yet you have never given me a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. You see that? So now there's jealousy, there's anger, there's frustration, all of that. And then, I was asking myself over and over again, well, if the older son was very sure about who he was and who he belonged to and his inheritance and, and all that, he wouldn't feel this way. He probably would have felt the same way his father felt, for his brother. And he certainly would not have felt jealous or angry or fearful or whatever, but this is what happens when we don't know who we are. And so I want to keep this short, so I'll just get to the point. There's so much talk about this coronavirus outbreak, and this is just an example. This is the most current thing, so I'm just going to use that as an example, because a lot of people, including, my friends and family, who are very concerned. And I'm not saying that we should just live in denial. Yeah, accept that there's a serious thing happening around the world, but don't be so wrapped up in it that you start to question who you are and you forget your identity. These things that happen around us must never lead us to a place of questioning who we are. Sometimes we don't realize that that's happening, and that's why it is important to keep a check on that. And every day, every night, ask yourself, who am I? Am I very sure of my identity in Jesus Christ? And if not, and if you're just, led by fear, and I'm not, and I say this in love, I've experienced this too, obviously. If you are wrapped up in everything that's going on, and if you are, if you feel that unbelief creeping up, and you're spending so much time thinking about this and trying to process what's going on and reading about everybody's experience and hearing about cancellations and all these travel restrictions and all this stuff, and you're feeling fearful and all that, then this is step 1. Even before you go and read Psalm 91 100 times, this is what should be done, is sit down with the Lord and make sure you are reminded once again of who you are.